My parents turned every family conflict into a financial penalty system, but the real purpose only became clear when my sibling tried to break it for the first time. I never thought I would grow up in a house where love had a price tag, but that's exactly what it became. Every argument, every mistake, every disrespectful tone had a fine attached to it. And the worst part was how normal it slowly started to feel. My parents didn't call it punishment. They called it accountability. I used to believe them when I was younger, until I realized accountability never seemed to apply equally to all of us. It started small at first. A late homework submission meant I owed the family fund $5. Breaking a plate during chores was $10. Talking back was $20. But it wasn't just money. It was recorded. Written down in a notebook my father kept like it was some sacred ledger. He even had columns for behavior impact and family contribution deduction. At first, I thought it was just their way of teaching discipline. They made it sound so logical, so structured, so fair. But fairness was never really the point. I just didn't see it yet. My older sibling, Mara, noticed it first. She always noticed things before I did. She would stare at the notebook whenever Dad left it on the table, like she was trying to decode something hidden between the lines. I used to think she was just being paranoid, until I saw her entries compared to mine. Same mistake, different penalty, always higher for her every time. When I asked my mom about it, she smiled like I was being naive. She said Mara was more defiant, that she needed stronger guidance. I accepted that answer for years, because accepting it was easier than questioning it, and questioning them never ended well. There was a rule in our house that wasn't written anywhere. Don't challenge the system, because every challenge came with its own financial consequence. Still, life moved on, or at least it pretended to. We learned how to behave in ways that minimized penalties. We learned how to apologize quickly, how to stay quiet when emotions ran high, how to measure every sentence before speaking it. My brother Jay, the youngest, adapted the fastest. He barely spoke at home, not because he was shy, but because silence was free. Mara, though, never adapted. She pushed, constantly, and every push added another entry in that notebook. I remember one night clearly. It was after dinner. Mara had asked why she had to pay more for the same mistakes I made. Dad didn't even look up. He just said, "Because you should know better by now." That sentence stuck with me because it didn't explain anything. It just ended the conversation. Mara stopped talking for the rest of the night, but I saw her watching the notebook again later. Her expression had changed. Not anger exactly, something more focused. Like she was starting to see a pattern. A system inside the system. A purpose no one was saying out loud. Weeks passed like that. Quiet tension building under normal routines, until the day everything shifted. It started with a small mistake. I accidentally spilled juice on the couch. It was nothing serious, or at least I thought it wasn't. Dad came in, looked at it, and wrote it down immediately. $15, no discussion, no warning. Mara laughed under her breath, not at me. At him. That was the first time I noticed her doing that. Like she was no longer afraid of the numbers. That night she asked for the notebook directly, no hesitation. The entire room went silent, even Jay stopped moving. Dad asked her why. She said she wanted to check the system. Mom told her not to be dramatic, but Mara didn't back down. She said she had the right to see how her behavior tax was calculated. That word changed something in Dad's face. He handed it over, too quickly. Like he didn't want to argue. Mara sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour, flipping pages, silent, too silent. I remember watching her fingers move faster as she read, then slower, then stop completely. When she finally looked up, her expression wasn't angry. It was confused, like something she trusted had stopped making sense. She closed the notebook gently and said one sentence I'll never forget. "This doesn't add up." Mom immediately told her she was being disrespectful. Dad said she was trying to undermine authority, but Mara didn't argue back. She just asked one question. "Why are the deductions always highest for me?" No one answered. Not immediately. That silence felt heavier than any punishment I had ever received. Dad finally said it was because she was the oldest, that she set the standard, that expectations were higher for leaders. It sounded reasonable when he said it, almost convincing. But Mara nodded slowly like she didn't believe a word of it. And then she did something that changed everything. She asked to see the past receipts, not just the notebook entries, the actual money tracking. That's when Mom snapped. She said enough was enough. That children don't audit their parents, and that phrase stuck in my mind. Audit, like we were talking about business, not family. Mara didn't argue again, but she stopped participating in the system after that night, completely. And that's when things started getting worse, because the system didn't just track mistakes, it enforced them. The next week, Jay forgot to clean his room. Normally, that would cost him $10, but instead, Dad said the penalty would be deferred. That was new. I had never heard that before. Deferred penalties started stacking, quietly, like invisible debt. Mara pointed it out. She said the system was turning behavior into compounding interest. Dad told her not to use words she didn't understand. But she did understand, better than he realized, and I could see it now. She wasn't just questioning fairness anymore, she was questioning purpose. Why the system existed at all. The turning point came during a family dinner. Mara refused to pay a penalty she had been assigned for tone correction. She said the tone correction was subjective. Mom said rules weren't subjective. Mara said they were if only one person writes them. That sentence broke the room. Dad stood up immediately, said she was being ungrateful, said everything they did was for our future discipline. But Mara didn't move. She just looked at the notebook again and asked if she could calculate the total amount she had paid over the years. That's when I saw something I had never seen before. Dad hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough, because hesitation meant there was something to hide. Mom tried to redirect the conversation, but Mara kept going. She asked for total family fund usage, not just penalties, but where the money went. Dad finally said it wasn't her concern, that it was for household management. But she didn't stop. She started writing her own calculations on a napkin, comparing entries, rechecking totals, muttering under her breath. And then she said something quietly. "You've been redistributing it." No one spoke. That was the first time the word redistributing had entered our house. It sounded too precise, too intentional. Mom told her to stop accusing, but Mara wasn't accusing. She was concluding, and that scared me more than anything else. That night, she didn't sleep. I saw her light on past midnight, and for the first time, I felt like the system wasn't just controlling behavior. It was hiding something. The next morning, she was gone, not physically, but emotionally. She stopped acknowledging penalties entirely, stopped responding to Dad's entries, stopped participating in discussions about accountability. And that's when the real tension began, because ignoring the system didn't make it disappear, it made it react. Dad started adding new categories: non-compliance fee, disruption surcharge, respect deficiency adjustment. Each one felt more arbitrary than the last. But Mara didn't react. She just kept observing, like she was waiting for something to break. And it did. A week later, Jay made a small comment at breakfast. He said it didn't make sense that Mara's penalties were always reinvested into family improvements. That phrase came from him, not Mara, and it was the first time I realized he had been listening too. Dad froze, Mom dropped her spoon, and Mara finally looked up, like she had been waiting for that exact sentence. She asked Jay where he heard that. He said he had seen the ledger notes. Hidden pages, pages I didn't know existed. Dad tried to take the notebook away immediately, but Jay had already taken photos. That's when everything collapsed, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a structure finally realizing it had been unstable for years. Mara laid the photos on the table, one by one, and I saw it too. Line items that weren't penalties, they were transfers. From Mara's deductions into accounts labeled under Dad's name, or Mom's, or emergency family reserve. But there were no emergencies, at least none we were told about. Mara didn't yell, she just asked the question that changed everything. "How long have you been using my penalties as funding?" Dad tried to explain, but his explanation kept changing. First it was discipline, then it was budgeting, then it was temporary allocation strategy. Each version weaker than the last. Mom finally said something that made it clear. She said it was necessary, that without it they couldn't maintain stability. Mara asked stability for who? No one answered, and that silence told me everything. The system was never about behavior, it was about control of resources, and Mara had been the main source. I felt sick realizing how long it had been happening in front of me. How many mistakes I thought were just discipline were actually transactions. Mara pushed her chair back slowly and said she was done participating. Dad said she couldn't just opt out. Mara said she already had, and then she stood up and walked away from the table. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just finality. The days after that felt different. The system still existed, but it felt hollow, like a machine running without purpose. Dad kept writing entries, but fewer now, more hesitant. Mom stopped enforcing them with the same intensity. Jay started asking more questions, and I started noticing everything I had ignored before. The uneven penalties, the unexplained transfers, the way every lesson seemed to benefit the household finances more than our behavior. One evening, I asked Mara if she regretted breaking it. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said she didn't break it, she just stopped feeding it. That distinction stayed with me because she was right. The system only worked because we participated. Eventually, the notebook stopped appearing on the table. No one announced its end. It just disappeared, like it had never mattered in the first place. But what stayed wasn't silence. It was awareness. We saw each other differently after that, not as roles in a system, but as people who had been assigned value without consent. And that realization didn't fix anything. It just made everything harder to ignore. Mara moved out a few months later. The relationship between her and our parents never recovered. Jay became more vocal at home. I became more careful, and my parents never brought up the system again. But sometimes I still think about that notebook and how something that looked like discipline was actually dependency in disguise. The hardest part wasn't discovering the truth. It was realizing how long we accepted it without question, and how easily fairness can be rewritten when only one side controls the ledger. Even now, I still don't know if my parents believed they were doing the right thing, or if they just convinced themselves it was necessary. But I do know this. Once you see the numbers behind the behavior, you can never unsee what they were really counting. And in our case, it was never mistakes. It was power. And none of us realized we had already been paying for it long before we ever saw the bill.